Okay, good Friday morning, Backyard Naturalist. Friends, it is May 3rd, and my name is Tim, and I will be your host for this week's Backyard Naturalist episode brought to you by the Urban Ecology Center. It's a little dreary outside in my backyard, at least today, as we take a little bit of a turn into the philosophical, the unknown, the theoretical, the mysterious, and certainly the unseen portion of our backyards. This program often looks at the different kinds of known life forms, or at least what we think we know about those life forms that inhabit our backyard. But what about the unknown? Whether or not they exist, I think this deserves a spotlight at least for a week. So I hope you are sitting or standing or lying comfortably in front of the glow of your device as we explore the unknown in episode XXXIII of season 6 of the Backyard Naturalist, what we do in the shadow biosphere. And we have construction going in our house. So I'm going to just close the door here. Seamless transition. And we will get right to the shadow biosphere in a moment, right after we give gratitude to you for being here today, whether you're live with us here on Friday morning or recorded later, whether it's me or my recorded image and voice. We are both very grateful that you're here with us today. And as always, a very special shout out to the subscribers out there. Thank you for your support. Believe it or not, we are making our way into summer. And if you don't have a subscription and would like to support this community, I encourage you to try out fantastic months worth of programming this summer. And I do apologize. There's not a lot of shadow biosphere humor out there, but this is what I could find. And I know some of you support us at the level of super subscribers. And if you do, you get access to our still relatively new program, Green Spaces, Familiar Faces. We have a blast engaging local personalities and asking them to take us to some of their favorite green spaces to show them off to us and to tell us about them, like show and tell. And so the next familiar face will be State Representative Darren Madison, who grew up right on my block here, was a young scientist at the Urban Ecology Center, a kid with unlimited passion and energy and humor and super smart, and who now, as an adult, has taken that passion and energy to the state legislature. He is an absolute joy, and I hope you can join us for this walk. It is free to super subscribers, but anyone can join us on this program. If you have any questions, please reach out to me anytime after this program ends this morning. And it's almost here, the Brew City Birding Festival, which was formerly run by the Urban Ecology Center and is now run by Visit Milwaukee. It begins next Friday. In fact, the celebration kicks off right here on Backyard Naturalist with an episode on flamingos. So here in Milwaukee, to see flamingos, it's usually the plastic variety that grace our backyards. We did have some flamingos up here a year or two ago in Lake Michigan, but usually you have to go to backyards south of here, and you can either get the live version or at least the Disney animatronic version of the flamingo. And then this is followed up by 10 days of wonderful programs all over the city, all over the Great Brew City. There may be a little bit of bias from me, but my favorite event during the week is the UEC's own Green Birding Challenge, which will be at Washington Park for the first time this year. We'd love for you to put a team together or join a team and come celebrate birds. Do your best to put together the biggest list you can without using fossil fuels. So it might be a walk, it might be a bike ride, or you can be like my dad and compete in what's called a big sit. So you just hang out and look for birds. Supports the Urban Ecology Center's mission of connecting people in cities to nature and to each other. And while you're here, you can check out our brand spanking new, beautiful Urban Ecology Center at Washington Park. We'd love to see you on Saturday, May 10th. And if you have little ones in your lives, bring again, lots going on during the festival, from birding by canoe, a bird themed game night, a keynote speaker on bird-friendly coffee. If you'd like to check out all of the great programs that are being offered by a lot of great people and organizations, you can go to the Visit Milwaukee website and just search the Brew City Birding Festival. This is just a small sampling of the programs happening. You can see here from the BIPOC Birding Club of Wisconsin, the Raptors from Schlitz Audubon, Walk-in Forest Home Cemetery, Havenwood State Forest. So much birds, so much life. And I do want to acknowledge the sources for much of the information from a lot of these backyard naturalists, or at least the ones that I host. And I learned about the shadow biosphere for the first time from the Stuff You Should Know podcast, and one of my favorites, and because they talk about all kinds of stuff we should know. So the shadow biosphere, and I think I'd be willing to guess that as long as humans have been around, we've been wondering. We have a brain structure that allows us to wonder about life, certainly the meaning of life and why we're here when it ends. And I understand I'm still freezing up a little bit, so I'm just going to change something quickly on my phone so I'm not tied to the internet here either. Bear with me 1 second. Hopefully this works. So here, did I just make it worse? Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. Try this, see if this works better. Let me know. Thank you for texting me, Amanda. Let me know if this still doesn't work. Okay. Where was I? So humans wonder about life. It's something still kind of drives me nuts, whether I'm in the shower or on a walk or something, when I'm just thinking about what the heck life is. Why are we here? What is our purpose? For some, it's a spiritual journey. For some, it's a religious journey. For some, it's just, it expands our brain. So, why are we here? What happens to us when it ends? Our desire to categorize led to what we call systematics and scientific names and grouping. So that is grouping life into different things, whatever life is. And we know that there are still millions of species of life, what we call species, out there that we have yet to categorize here on Earth. And we've also been wondering about the existence of life on other planets. So we have the Drake equation, which looks at the probability of life existing on other planets. And just a few weeks ago, you probably heard the news, scientists found the best supporting evidence yet that a faraway planet orbiting another faraway star might be home to life. And a team from Cambridge University detected signs of specific molecules, dimethyl sulfide and dimethyl disulfide, that on Earth are only produced by simple living organisms like bacteria and marine phytoplankton. So it's possible that that planet not only supports life, but based on the concentrations they found of these gases, could be teeming with life. And it's possible that life is very common, at least in our galaxy, possibly throughout the universe. And the search for life on other planets also kind of brings us back to some major limitations that we have as humans trying to understand whether life exists on other planets. And even in how we try to understand life here on Earth, because we only have one reference point for life on a planet, which is life on Earth. So our search is looking for other planets that have similar quality to ours. it is possible that these chemicals, dimethyl sulfide and dimethyl disulfide, on other planets are produced by some geological force, even though it doesn't happen. At least we don't think it happens on our own planet. So we're really limited by what we know as conditions that produce life here on Earth, which in some senses lets us look for life like ours on Earth, but it really does add some major blind spots. And that's really what this episode is about. It kind of limits what we're looking for. So if we bring it back to us as humans, a fascinating book that so many of you have recommended me that I did start reading. It's called An Immense World, and in this book, the author talks about our desire to understand other forms of life here on Earth, and points out how severely limited we are as humans to understand other organisms by how we perceive the world. So we're a very visual species. So much of our information and how we explore the world and try to understand for sighted people is through the eyes. But we also listen, we touch, we smell. And so if other organisms do these things that we do as well, it's probably easier for us to understand how they perceive the world. And that is a case to a degree. If we take a bird, for instance, because the bird festival is coming up. So this eastern bluebird, the bird has eyes, so we can understand we have eyes also. They have ears under those feathers. There's a mouth, a tongue. They have little nostrils called nares. So we could look at this bird and say, well, it's decently easy for us to understand likely how that bird perceives the world. But if you go a little deeper, then you see some major changes pop up already. So yes, they have eyes, but the structure and depth of their eyesight is quite a bit different from us. They're tetrachromatic. We're trichromatic. So we have 3 different kinds of cone cells. They have 4 different kinds of cone cells, which means they can see colors we can't even imagine. And they can see into the ultraviolet part of the spectrum. And you think of all the color shades that we can see with 3 primary colors and 3 different kinds of cones. Just imagine adding a 4th color to all of those combinations. And even we as humans, as individuals, may perceive these colors differently. I might see a color slightly different from one of you. So this doesn't mean bird vision is better than ours, but it's probably vastly different. And they can certainly see color structure where we can't. So that just sight. There's also a common misconception that birds can't smell very well, and that misconception is based on comparing our olfactory system or a dog's olfactory system with theirs, and that limits us. But it turns out birds smell way better than we assumed. We were kind of going off of that one misconception that was widely spread, and we're just starting to learn about this because again we're limited by our knowledge, and we're limited based on the structures of our own olfactory and vision system. So birds can taste and feel and do a lot of the same things that we can do, and they can hear low pressure changes in the upper atmosphere, and they can sense the magnetic field. And we can't even describe how they sense the magnetic field. We know that there's these structures in their cells. It could be through their eyes because of where they're concentrated, but then we're limited to describe that by what we know. So do they see the magnetic field? Do they smell it? Do they feel it? It might not be any of those things. It just might be this completely different sensory system that we just can't understand. But we still have to try to describe it through the ones that we do, through the senses that we have. And Ed Young talks about that a lot, about because we're so visually oriented, we put that in our speech. Like if I say, I see your point of view, that just kind of gets back to how visual we are. And so this idea that we are limited in how we perceive the world, or this idea that we perceive the world in our own unique way, was defined a long time ago as our Umwelt, which is the specific way in which organisms of a particular species perceive and experience the world. And that is shaped by the capabilities of their perceptual systems and their sensory organs. And that might not only be between species, that might be between members of the same species. So We sense the world very different from our dogs, from electric eels, from duckbill platypuses, from trees, from bacteria, from spiders, sea urchins. And then because of this, we tend to only understand other animals where our umwelts overlap. And then what's outside of ours is really hard. So the umwelt of dogs started to evolve a bit as they became domesticated because it probably became more important for a dog's survival to be more attuned to our umwelts. And it became more important for the dog to perceive things from a human perspective. So it's a crazy concept. Read the book; it's amazing. Uh, but that same concept ties very well back into when we're talking about the shadow biosphere. So we're searching for new forms of life, and we are likely extremely limited because we are looking for life forms and defining life based on how life behaves here on Earth. So it's like the Earth's life that we know has its own umwelt. And our natural inclination in the media is that aliens are going to have this humanoid characteristic. Um, Astrobiologists, on the other hand, are looking more for microbes than humanoids. If we see life on Earth, or outside of Earth, it's likely going to be very, very tiny. We don't know that, but that's probably the most likely. But our search for extraterrestrial life is firmly based on how we define life on Earth. So we're looking for these gases that are produced by life on Earth, and so that really limits and also focuses our search to the characteristics that we have defined as life on Earth. And so there's no one good definition of life that covers everything, but in general, when we look at the criteria for life on Earth, it's carbon based. If it's not carbon based, we don't consider it to be alive. Quartz is silica based. It grows in an organized fashion, but we don't consider it to be alive. Um, the second characteristic is that life as we define it is programmed by the amino acids that make up DNA and RNA, which are the instructions for building proteins that are transcribed. Third, we say life has to be self-replicating. The program, it has a continuous loop that as long as the raw materials are there, life should be able to continue. And then finally, life as we define it evolves through natural selection. And so it's you know, in some senses, this is a pretty wide definition of life, like kind of all encompassing, but it's not to many scientists. It's not broad enough, particularly to astrobiologists or microbiologists. It's not even broad enough to give us a clear definition of whether we consider a virus to be alive. I mean, we can set our definitions, uh, for our own understanding, but that's exactly what it is. Then it's a set based on our own understanding, and it doesn't allow really for encompassing other broader viewpoints. So scientists have questioned whether this definition of life is broad enough. And then scientists most responsible for questioning this fairly recently is Carol Cleland, who said that perhaps while we're looking for life on other planets, we might be completely missing new forms of life right here on Earth. And not just like finding and documenting new types of microbes, like a completely different kind of life that might be here that we just don't know about. So it could be made up of different things. It could use different structures, different processes. And so to define it and find it, we would need to broaden our understanding and our definition of life or what life could be. And so looking here on Earth, we are almost certainly looking for microbes, for microorganisms, as much as we'd love to find a big, scary or big, cute form of life. What we're looking for is going to be very, very small, probably. And so Carol really asked the question, if we're looking for new forms of life, how would we know if we found something new? Because the current process in trying to identify new microorganisms is to you maybe find soil samples or water samples, and you sift through that, you use microscopes, and then when you think you found something, you try to isolate its DNA and look at its genome. But what if the life that we're looking for is fundamentally different than the life we know of? What if it's not related to life as we know it? And so she wrote a paper called The Possibility of Alternative Microbial Life on Earth. And this is where she turned the phrase the shadow biosphere, because even our process of looking for life on Earth would completely miss something that doesn't conform to our understanding of life, but could still be alive. So if we go back to another concept that kind of dominates our thinking and what we determine as being alive, in the 1950s, Francis Crick defined, at least with the public defining of what he called the central dogma of life. And that's that basic biology textbook that DNA has the instructions for building all the proteins required for life. RNA copies these instructions and takes them to ribosomes, which are able to read those instructions and then assemble amino acids into proteins. This process was necessary for life to evolve. And this becomes important in the shadow biosphere, as we'll see as we move to how we think life may have begun on Earth. So again, the primary theory is that life began on Earth in what we have called the primordial soup. So it could be an area like a shallow tidal pool. It could be a warm part of the ocean, probably about a body of water where all the building blocks of life are floating around. As you have amino acids, you have proteins, and then all you need is something called a privileged function to get life underway. And what causes that, maybe not necessarily electricity, it could be something, but the most likely mechanism is that something kicks off the self-replicating process. It could also begin with a metabolic process. It could begin with a compartmentalization, but it has to start somewhere as a chemical reaction that leads to a chain reaction that becomes self-sustaining and becomes more complex. In our case, you maybe start with organelles and then living organisms. The big thought here is that this happened once in the Earth's past, and that led to what we call LUCA, which is the last universal common ancestor. So essentially, if we have our family trees, parent, grandparent, great, 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 great parent. At some point, all of us, according to this theory, go back to a single ancestor that may have started with this. And this is where then Carol comes back and says, okay, this process makes sense, but what if this process happened multiple times just here on Earth? Is it possible that the materials that we know of as essential to life are essential to us because those were the materials that were present when our version of life started? Could life have started in different places using different materials and different chemicals? And if so, could that life still exist today and we just haven't found it because we don't know what to look for? Again, we're getting into some really fun brain space, but it is fun for me. And I'd be happy to follow this up later over coffee or beer or something. But so one example that Carol is talking about is we know of the 5 nucleic acids that we know are essential to life because they make the base pairs in DNA, and RNA. And we give them the letters. Those are the letters you memorize in the textbooks, the A, C, G, T base pairs of adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. And then in RNA, we switch out the thymine for uracil. But there are at least 6 more nucleic acids out there. And in a laboratory setting, scientists were able to create artificial forms of DNA. They call them Hachimoji DNA by swapping in some of these other nucleic acids for the ones that we currently use. And what's amazing is that new DNA with the new acids was the ribosomes were still able to transcribe with them, which is A, absolutely nuts. And then B, leads us to the question, um, many questions, but we'll start with we have A, C, G, and T, the building blocks of life. Because is that because when life started, those were the four most common nucleic acids floating around in the soup, or were those the ones that were most successful into making proteins? Here's another question to chew on. Like all proteins that we know of are made from 20 amino acids, but there are more than 500 amino acids out there on Earth. So again, the question is are those 20 amino acids that we are relying on because those were the 20 amino acids that were around where life formed? Uh, Another consideration, all amino acids that build life are what we consider either left-handed or right-handed, which is based on the direction that the atoms are oriented. And in a lab setting, in chemistry setting, you can create these. It's called chirality. Sugars can be both left and right-handed, but the sugars that we need that are important to us are the right-handed ones. The left-handed ones do nothing for us. Um, and the amino acids are the left-handed ones are the ones that we care about, and the right-handed ones we don't. So we live in an environment where a bunch of the amino acids and sugars don't help us, uh, but they were around. And so when life emerged on Earth, only a small percentage of the available nucleic acids, of the available amino acids, and the available sugars were actually used in life. That begs the question, if life emerged at a different time and a different place, is it possible that different amino acids, different nucleic acids, different chirality, different opposite-handed amino acids and sugars, would they have been selected for, and then would they be the important ones for life? So if life evolved multiple times, not only on other planets, but here on Earth, did other forms of life use those other building blocks and processes, essentially, which could render them almost invisible to us because we're not looking for them? So we found 80 amino acids on a meteor that hit the Earth. So the seeds of life are out there. The seeds of life on Earth could be extraterrestrial. And if life did evolve multiple times on Earth, is it possible that those other forms of life didn't need to evolve? The conditions they were in were perfect. They're kind of stuck. We don't know where they are. We don't know how to find them. Or could those other life forms have been incorporated into ours through things like lateral gene transfer? It's thought that our bodies are, because of multiple organisms coming together, um, like viruses, have been incorporated into our system. Um, it's also possible that the new life forms were, brought into us, contributing to our success. And it again, if this broadens your mind, it could have started many times. Life could have started many, many times here on Earth and on other planets. So if we take that concept, bring it back to our search for life on Earth, one of the best places to look for life on Earth is in extreme conditions. So uh, life forms that live in extreme conditions like cold and hot, deep, high up in the atmosphere, volcanoes, vents, we tend to look for life in those extreme environments. And that helps us because it kind of broadens the conditions that we see as able to support life. So for a long time, we didn't think life could exist in the upper atmosphere. We didn't think life could exist super deep near hydrothermal vents or extremely acidic environments or extremely basic environments. We thought there were limiting temperatures for life, and it was published like life can't exist past 100 and so degrees until we found them living at 212 degrees in these hydrothermal vents. And the more we looked, the more we found that life adapted to those extremes, which kind of by its nature had to broaden what we considered, the conditions for life. Uh, and so these might be excellent places if we are starting to look for these shadow biosphere forms of life. Um, these might be good places to look because some of these environments might be too extreme for life as we know it. But if there was life out there that was formed again through different processes and different materials, they might be fine in these environments. They might have no problem at all. Um, and even we kind of hit these boundaries, right? We determine that there's some of the areas of the oceans are dead zones, at least according to life that we're looking for, or if you go down into the earth. And so at some point when we find nothing, we stop. But if you did look further beyond what we consider dead zones, especially if you broaden your definition of life to these new things, those might be ideal places for a new form of life to exist if they do. But regardless, we're going to be looking for microbes, and considering that we've only cultured and described way less than 1% of the estimated microbes on Earth, we still have a lot of our current form of life to discover. And some of that new life then might be a gateway to what we are currently considering the shadow biosphere. So, for example, this is a bacteria called GFAJ1. And for a while, this was thought to be the breakthrough. This was thought to be a shadow biosphere organism because uh, one of the one of the things that all life as we know it is one of the processes and materials is that they make DNA from phosphorus. And when they first looked at this, they did not find that this organism, this bacteria, was using phosphorus at all. It was primarily arsenic based. And so they thought this could be it. This could be a new form of life that's different from what we're used to. But after intense scrutiny, they did find out that there is an extremely trace amount of phosphorus that this bacteria relies on. So it kind of puts it back squarely into our life form. But again, it stretches the boundaries. And maybe this is a gateway to something that is arsenic based life. Maybe that we'll find a gateway to something that is silica based life. And so while this was a false alarm, there are some other current contenders. There's something, if you're familiar with the Southwest, there's something called desert varnish. Um, you often see it on very dry cliff faces, uh, in and it kind of takes on a shiny a sheen, but it's a dark sheen. And early humans used to create drawings and symbols not by writing on the rock, but by scraping the rock away. So, it's this thin veneer that quote unquote grows on the rock faces. It's extremely slow growing. It This is crazy. It grows the width of a human hair every 1,000 years. It's made up of a good deal of manganese, but it's not drawing manganese from the rock. And so there, at least, from what our knowledge is, there is not a really good biological or geological or geochemical processes that account for this. So it is a mystery. It's not a crystal, but it is under intense scrutiny. And it seems the answers will come, and it seems to be that there is some geological processes that will define it, but it could be biologic or more towards this biological side, even something that's again maybe a new form of life. So we continue to look for life on other planets. We continue to try and describe life here on Earth, but there seems to be a growing need to expand what we're looking for. And if you think of one of the ways that scientists detect living organisms is they look for ribosomes. If there is an RNA-based organism, they might not have ribosomes. And so we would completely miss it. Based on the standards that we're looking for, we would not look at it. And again, you're talking about microbes in soil or water, very easy to miss. It's easy to miss the current ones that we consider part of what we know of as life. So easy to miss. To me, it's kind of fun to think of this as, or at least it helps me understand. It's more like if you look at a Lego set, right? You get a Lego set for Christmas. You get a predetermined set of building blocks, and you can make a whole bunch of different things. but you're limited by the Legos that are in your set. So, and your friend might get a completely different Lego set with different Lego blocks. And so you won't be able to build the exact same things. And maybe one of you gets a Duplo. So now you're going to your friend's house looking for a Duplo. You might not even see that there's a Lego set that can do the same thing as a Duplo. That's the best mind. That's where my mind goes when I'm thinking about the shadow biosphere. Um, and if life as we know it formed in a different time and a place, we might have been something different. We might be silica based. We might use left-handed sugars. We might be memorizing different letters for the building blocks of DNA. We might require different amino acids, and life could look pretty different. And would we, in our current life, even recognize a different form of life like that? So, you know, we're here. Our brain allows us to ponder if life exists on other planets, but now it's, does life exist on Earth in a different form? And if life evolved multiple times on Earth, did our current version of life just outcompete the others? Will those others one day outcompete us? Did we incorporate them? Did they incorporate us? Or are they just here biding their time in obscurity? No effect on us. We have no effect on them. So certainly something to think about. And, here's just another, if you add AI into the mix, then it really starts to get fun, because now we're looking at synthetic life that could potentially incorporate into life, carbon-based life. And so you kind of, it really starts to make a complicated situation of not only what life is, because you could create artificial forms of life that do everything that we do, at least in our current definitions. Um, and you know, we just don't know what life might look like here if it happens. And so I like to, Susan Samard broadened our view of the possibility of plants having sentience, awareness. Ed Young broadened our view in understanding how animals perceive the world. And Carol Cleland broadened our understanding of what it might mean to be alive. These are all good things. Healthy skepticism has its place and it's very important. But it's the ones that help us open new doors in our knowledge that were previously shut. Um, and then you get folks that are ridiculed by the mainstream, but these are the ones that really help move our understanding of knowledge forward. And we consider shadows as mysterious, real but not real, sometimes scary. But a shadow doesn't even become available until you turn on some light. And then when that happens, you start to see things from new perspectives. So, heady topic, pretty complex, uh, fun to think about, makes your brain hurt, but it was fun to think about. So thank you for joining us here today. I will stop sharing my screen, I think.